You ever felt the weight of someone's words land perfectly, promising loyalty, understanding, even love, only to sense, somewhere beneath the surface, that the promise feels hollow? That is not insight. That is illusion. The strategists of old knew this law of human nature. People do not betray themselves in the grand speeches they rehearse. They betray themselves in the unguarded instant when they believe no one of consequence is watching, when the only eyes left belong to the weak. Look at reality for what it is. Words cost nothing. Anyone can borrow them for an hour. But the way a person treats someone who holds no power over their future, that is the mirror no one can polish. This is where most people get it wrong. They listen to the music of language and miss the rhythm of behavior. They trade clarity for comfort. And years later, they wonder why the relationship that sounded so right quietly hollowed them out. Stick with me until the very end. The 5 signs we'll walk through today begin as quiet observations, but they deepen into something that can quietly guard your time, your trust, and your peace. If you're here for the first time, I hope you'll consider subscribing to Guiguzi Strategic Wisdom. These reflections are written for those who want to move through life with clearer eyes, not louder voices. Welcome back, everyone, to Guiguzi Strategic Wisdom. I'm David Welbeck, the writer behind this video. Today we're turning our attention to a single, unflinching principle. Don't judge people by their words. Watch how they treat the weak. I have watched this truth unfold in quiet offices at dusk, in family kitchens where the conversation suddenly stops, in friendships that once felt unbreakable. And every time, the same pattern repeats. The person who speaks of empathy with polished conviction often reveals a different story the moment the balance of power tilts. Not because they are evil, because human instinct is older than any vow we make. Desire wants reward. Ego wants elevation. Self-control is the rarest discipline, and the weak, by definition, offer neither reward nor elevation. So the mask slips. That is not cruelty in every case. That is nature, unchecked. Let's walk through the first sign together. The first sign appears the moment someone believes they are speaking to a person who can give them nothing back. A server in a restaurant, a junior colleague who has no influence over the next promotion, still the quiet neighbor who asks for a small favor. Watch the tone. Not the public smile they offer when cameras or bosses are present. The private shift when they think the interaction is invisible. A wise person once observed that the stream reveals the mountain's true shape, not by its roar at the top, but by how gently, or how roughly, it flows around the smallest stone in its path. That ancient insight still holds in our world of titles and LinkedIn profiles. The modern explanation is simple. When a person feels no consequence will follow, the performance ends. What remains is the raw hierarchy their instincts have built inside them. Psychologically, it is the oldest reflex we carry. Status seeking is wired deep. For most of our history, survival meant climbing, protecting rank, to conserving energy for those who could help us rise or threaten us. The weak offered neither, so the impatient mind dismisses them without thought. The composed mind, however, pauses. It remembers that power is temporary and that every person you meet is carrying some unseen weight. I remember a lunch years ago in a small cafe downtown. A colleague I had admired for his articulate vision of teamwork and respect was ordering coffee. The barista, a young woman clearly having a difficult shift, misheard his order and brought the wrong drink. His smile stayed fixed for half a second. Then the voice dropped, the words sharpened, the body language said what his polished meeting speeches never did. You are beneath this moment. no one else in the cafe would have noticed. I did. That single exchange told me more about his character than every strategy session we had ever shared. The real-life setting is everywhere. The workplace where the boss who preaches culture snaps at the intern who fumbles a simple task. The social gathering where the charming guest ignores the elderly aunt who wants to join the conversation. The friendship where one person dominates every plan because the other is too gentle to push back. Let the instinct or ego take over here, and the consequence is quiet but certain. You invite into your circle someone who will discard you the moment you yourself become inconvenient. You mistake performance for character. And one day, when your own life tilts and you need steadiness, you discover the hand that once shook yours so warmly is already reaching for someone else who can still be useful. The closing insight lands heavy. Maturity is not the absence of impatience. It is the discipline to govern it when no one is grading you. Those who know how to wait, who stay clear-minded even when the interaction brings them zero advantage, they are the ones whose words you can eventually trust, because their behavior already proved trustworthy when it cost them nothing to be kind. Now the second sign reveals itself in the moment of vulnerability. This one is subtler. It appears when someone weaker shows their softness, an emotional crack, a request for help, a moment of doubt. The fake person's response is not anger. It is discomfort followed by a polite withdrawal. They change the subject. They offer a quick slogan. They suddenly remember another obligation. Their composure fractures not because they hate weakness, but because weakness reminds them of their own carefully hidden fragility. It is not because they lack intelligence. It is because they lack the inner life that can sit with discomfort without needing to fix it or flee it. The psychology here runs deep. Human beings are wired for reciprocity. We give expecting return. When the weak offer only their need, the calculating mind registers a net loss. The impatient mind feels its own time being stolen. Only the disciplined mind understands that real relationships are not transactions measured in the moment. They are investments measured across seasons. The person who can hold space for another's weakness without rushing to reassert their own strength is operating from a different inner economy. Picture a marriage in its 10th year. One partner has just lost their job. The fear is raw, the confidence shaken. The partner who truly sees does not rush in with solutions or comparisons. They sit in the uncertainty. The other partner, the one whose words once rang with "for better or worse," shifts uncomfortably, offers a pep talk that sounds rehearsed, then checks their phone. They are not cruel. They are simply unable to tolerate the mirror that vulnerability holds up. The consequence of missing this sign is the slow erosion of trust. You build a life with someone who performs support beautifully when the stakes are low. But when your own knees buckle, you find yourself standing alone in the very relationship you thought would hold you. Loneliness inside closeness is one of the quietest pains a person can carry. The insight that stays with you is this: real composure is not the ability to stay calm when everything is fine, and it is the ability to stay present when someone else's world is not. Those who master that presence do not need to broadcast their depth. Their treatment of the weak already speaks. Do you see the turning point here? We have only begun. The next 3 signs will take us deeper, into the private rooms of family, the unseen corners of ambition, and the final test that separates those who merely speak strategy from those who live it. The second sign unfolds when weakness is no longer hidden. A person lets their guard down. They share a fear, admit a failure, reveal a limitation. The response you witness in that moment is not about empathy in the abstract. It is about whether the other person can hold space without rushing to reassert their own superiority. The strategists of old would say it this way: the mountain does not prove its height by shouting down the valley. It proves it by how steadily it shelters the smallest tree growing in its shadow. That principle still governs the hidden architecture of trust today. The modern explanation is straightforward. Most of us have been trained to perform compassion when it is socially rewarded. But when the exchange offers no applause, no status, no future leverage, the performance ends. What remains is the raw reflex. Discomfort, deflection, or a polite retreat into advice that keeps distance intact. Psychologically, this is the instinct of self-preservation meeting the mirror of mortality. Weakness reminds us that our own armor is thinner than we admit. The impatient mind cannot tolerate that reminder. The ego translates it as a threat. Only the mature mind has cultivated enough inner quiet to stay present without needing to fix, judge, or flee. I saw this play out in a family I knew well. My neighbor, a man respected in our circle for his thoughtful conversations about supporting one another, had a mother who was slowly losing her independence. One evening, over coffee on his porch, she quietly asked him to help sort through old letters. Nothing heavy, just time and patience. His tone stayed kind for 30 seconds. Then the impatience crept in. He glanced at his watch, offered a quick "we'll do it soon," and changed the subject to his latest work project. She smiled the way older people do when they know they have become an inconvenience. I never forgot the small way her shoulders dropped. He was not cruel. He simply treated her vulnerability as a minor interruption in his larger story. You see this pattern in friendships that feel deep until one person hits a season of loss, or in a marriage where one partner's health falters and the other's encouragement suddenly sounds like a script. The setting is intimate, the stakes invisible to outsiders. Yet the consequence runs deep. You tie your life to someone who can only love the version of you that is strong, useful, or impressive. When your own strength wanes, and it always does, you discover the relationship was built on performance, not presence. The slow betrayal is not loud. It is the growing realization that you are now the weak one being politely managed. The insight that stays with me is this: composure is not the ability to stay calm when life is easy. It is the discipline to remain kind when someone else's life is hard and offers you nothing in return. Those who possess that discipline do not need to announce their depth. Their treatment of the vulnerable already speaks louder than any promise. The third sign appears inside the private rooms of family and long-term obligation. Here, the mask is even thinner because the relationship feels permanent. No one is watching for headlines. No promotion hangs in the balance. Yet the way a person treats the elderly parent, the struggling sibling, or the child who is not yet successful reveals the same ancient law. The impatient will speak of duty in public and practice dismissal in private. It is not because family does not matter to them. It is because the weak within the family offer no immediate glory, no social currency, and no proof of their own importance. The psychology runs even older. Blood ties once meant survival, but modern life has layered new instincts on top. The hunger for visible achievement, the fear of being slowed down, the quiet calculation of emotional cost. The person who has not mastered self-control will treat the weak member of the family as a weight rather than a bond. They may still pay the bills, still show up for holidays. But the tone, the patience, the willingness to slow their own pace, that is where the truth lives. Think of the ambitious professional who returns home to an aging father who repeats the same stories. In front of friends, he calls himself a devoted son. Alone in the living room, the sighs grow audible, the glances at the phone more frequent. The father senses it. The son tells himself it is only human. And in one sense, he is right. But the wise person knows that only human is precisely what we are being asked to rise above. The consequence of missing this sign is one of the heaviest a person can carry. You build a home with someone who will one day look at you the same way when your own vitality fades. You raise children who learn that love is conditional on performance. Years later, when time has reversed the roles, you find yourself on the receiving end of the very impatience you once excused. Loneliness inside family is perhaps the most bitter kind, because the house is still full and the heart is already empty. The insight lands with weight. Maturity is not measured by how loudly you defend your loved ones in public. It is measured by how gently you treat them when their weakness costs you time, energy, and the illusion of control. Those who stay clear-minded here are not saints. They simply refuse to let instinct turn the people they claim to love into burdens. Do you see how these signs are beginning to form a single picture? The fourth sign surfaces in the arena of ambition and social competition. This is where the stakes feel higher and the disguise is therefore more refined. A person can champion equality, fairness, and lifting others up in every meeting and every post. Yet watch what happens when they encounter someone weaker in the same field. Someone whose talent is modest, whose network is small, whose presence brings no strategic advantage. The dismissal is rarely rude. It is elegant. A vague smile, a forgotten follow-up. The quiet decision that this person is not worth the investment of real attention. The ancient insight would remind us that the general does not reveal his true strategy on the parade ground, but on the night march when only the weakest soldier is watching. In our world of titles and personal brands, the same law holds. Words about inclusion are cheap when the spotlight is on. The test is what happens when the lights dim and the weak competitor stands in the way of your next step. Psychologically, ambition sharpens the instinct for efficiency. The mind begins to sort people into assets and liabilities. The weak become invisible, not because they are hated, but because they do not serve the larger plan. The person lacking self-mastery will justify this sorting as practical. The wise person recognizes it as the moment their character is being weighed. I once worked with a woman who was brilliant at articulating a vision of collaborative leadership. In group settings, she was warm to everyone. But when a quieter team member needed extra guidance to meet a deadline, her tone shifted to something clipped and slightly impatient. She never raised her voice. She simply became unavailable in ways that felt accidental. Over time, the quieter colleague began to shrink, and I realized I was watching the same pattern again. Words that sounded noble, behavior that quietly protected status. The consequence here is the slow corruption of your own circle. You surround yourself with people who mirror your ambition but share your blind spots. When the wheel of fortune eventually turns and you find yourself in the weaker position, the support you once withheld becomes the support you no longer receive. Now opportunity dries up not with drama, but with polite silence. The insight that cuts through is simple. Real strategy is not the art of using people. It is the discipline of never forgetting that every person you meet may one day hold the thread that pulls your own fate. Those who treat the weak with dignity in the middle of their own climb are not naive. They are playing the longer game. We are nearing the final sign, the one that brings everything we have seen into the light of lived reality. Stay with me a little longer. The fifth sign is the quietest, and for that reason the most revealing. The fifth sign is the quietest, and for that reason the most revealing. It does not flare in a single conversation or a public moment. It unfolds slowly across the long stretch of ordinary days, when the weakness in question is no longer surprising or temporary. It has become part of the landscape. The ancient insight would put it like this: the strategist is not tested when the enemy charges in full armor, but when the same small obstacle remains in the path week after week, month after month, and the only choice left is whether to step around it with grace or kick it aside in private frustration. In our time, that obstacle is often a person whose need does not end, an aging parent whose memory fades a little more each season, a colleague whose limitations never quite resolve, a friend whose quiet struggles have settled in for the long haul. The modern explanation is unflinching. Most of us can summon patience for a single afternoon. The performance holds when the calendar still promises an exit. But when the weeks turn into years and there is no applause, no status bump, no story you can tell that makes you look noble, the inner accounting changes. The mind begins to weigh the cost against the return. And for the person who has not yet mastered self-control, the return feels like zero. Psychologically, this is where desire and instinct reach their deepest layer. Human beings are wired for short-term reciprocity. We give, we expect movement, we move on. Long-term weakness breaks that circuit. It asks us to keep giving when the ledger never balances. The ego interprets the imbalance as a threat to its own progress. The impatient mind grows restless. Only the clear-minded soul has trained itself to see that some relationships are not transactions at all. They are quiet proofs of who we have become. So picture a marriage in its 22nd year. One partner's health has declined in ways no one saw coming. The appointments, the slowed pace, the small daily adjustments, they never end. In the early months, the other partner spoke beautifully about being there no matter what. Friends nodded with admiration. But as the seasons passed, the tone at home changed in ways only the two of them could hear. The sighs grew heavier. The help became mechanical. The eyes that once met with steady warmth now glanced toward the door, toward the life that still felt possible somewhere else. No shouting, no dramatic exit, just the slow subtraction of presence. I watched this happen to people I cared about. The words of commitment had been sincere once. The treatment of the weakness that remained told the truer story. You see the same pattern in workplaces that promise family values, until the loyal employee who can no longer keep the frantic pace becomes an unspoken burden. Or in friendships that drift because one person's season of struggle refuses to resolve on schedule. The setting is never dramatic. It is the kitchen at 7 a.m., the text thread that goes unanswered, the meeting where the once valued voice is gently sidelined. The consequence is the kind of loneliness that arrives while you are still surrounded by people. You realize too late that you invested your time, your heart, your future in relationships built on performance rather than character. When your own moment of prolonged weakness arrives, and it always does, you stand in the same quiet kitchen, receiving the same mechanical kindness you once excused in others. Still, the trade-off becomes clear. You kept the image, but you lost the substance. The insight that lands here carries real weight. Maturity is not the grand gesture on the good days. It is the steady, unglamorous decision to treat the weak with the same dignity when the days are ordinary and the years are long. Those who choose that path are not saints. They are simply people who have learned that every human life contains seasons of strength and seasons of fragility. and that the way we treat the fragile seasons determines the quality of our own. We have walked through the 5 signs together. Now let us bring the philosophy down from the mountaintop and set it squarely in the middle of lived reality, the place where time, relationships, family, work, social pressure, loneliness, trade-offs, betrayal, misjudging people, choosing the wrong moment, and the slow fear of losing yourself while trying to hold on to others, all collide. What truly reveals a fake person is not the eloquence of their promises. It is the moment the weak enter the room and the performance ends. What a wise person actually watches for is not brilliance or charm. It is the small, unguarded treatment of someone who can offer nothing back, today, tomorrow, or ever. Why do so many people mistake performance for sincerity? Because words are easy, and the world rewards the speaker. We want to believe the polished story because believing it spares us the harder work of reading behavior when no one is grading the test. The mature person is not a saint, not perfect, not free of impatience or ego. They are simply someone who has paid enough attention to life to know what matters, what to protect, what to let go of, what to wait for, and when to act. They understand that self-mastery is not the absence of instinct. It is the quiet governance of instinct when instinct would cost someone else their dignity. They know that timing is everything, that restraint is power, and that the hidden law of human nature is this: how you treat the weak when you believe it does not matter is exactly how you will one day be treated when your own strength fades. That is not theory. That is the pattern I have watched repeat across decades of quiet observation. Thank you for staying with me until the end. These reflections only matter if they help you see a little more clearly in your own life. If this video landed with you, I hope you'll consider subscribing to Guiguzi Strategic Wisdom. Share it with someone whose judgment you trust, or someone who might need the reminder. And if something here stirred a memory or a question of your own, leave a comment below. Your stories are part of what keeps this channel alive. I'm David Welbeck, the writer behind these videos. I'll see you in the next one.